Hey everyone, and welcome back to Horror Movies for Life YouTube channel. I'm your host Brian, and we're going to take a look at a horror anthology movie in this video, part of my July 2025 series that my subscribers actually picked. So, the movie we're going to take a look at today is one from my Scream Factory Blu-ray collection I've had for a while. Never seen it before, and that anthology movie is Nightmares from 1983. Is this Nightmares is this year's sleeper? Very clever tagline there. Um, I didn't watch any of the special features. It doesn't have a lot, but there's a few there you can see on the back. But yeah, Nightmares from 1983. So I'm always interested in the 80s horror anthology movies. So let's talk about Nightmares. Excuse me. Nightmares is a 1983 American horror anthology film directed by Joseph Sargent. The film is made up of four short films based on urban legends. Nightmares was originally filmed as a 2 hour pilot of a proposed television series to be broadcast by the NBC network during the 83-84 TV season. I mentioned that for a reason, which I'll get back into in my review. So the four stories, the first one is entitled Terror in Topanga. During a routine traffic stop, a highway patrolman is viciously stabbed by an unseen assailant. Though he survives and is taken to the hospital, the perpetrator is William Henry Glazer, a serial killer who escaped a mental institution and is currently terrorizing the Topanga area. So that we're kind of all familiar with that sort of story. It's been done before. The second story is entitled "The Bishop of Battle." J.J. Cooney is a immensely talented video game player and hustler who's obsessed with beating the Bishop of Battle, a notoriously difficult video game where players fight off enemies and escape from a 3D maze that features 13 different levels. JJ's friend, Zoc Maxwell, mentions how no one has ever made it to level 13. To this point, many people believe it's just a myth that there is a level 13. So that's the synopsis for that story. The third story is entitled The Benediction. Catholic priest Frank McLeod has lost his faith in God. Though he officiates the funeral of a young boy who was shot in a store robbery, he is unable to provide the mourners with the words of comfort. Visiting his bishop, Frank explains how he witnessed the boy's death firsthand and how the experience has convinced him that there is no God who would allow such suffering. And then the fourth and final story is entitled Night of the Rat. On a stormy night, housewife Claire Houston hears something scurrying in the attic in their house and believes it is rats. The next morning, she she browses the phone book to look for an exterminator despite her husband Stephen's hesitancy. Later that night, a rat is killed by one of the traps Claire sets, and Stephen throws it in the garbage. And then it goes from there. I didn't want to give too much away in that one. So, yeah, those are the four stories for Nightmares. As far as the cast goes, I didn't list everybody there as you can't in most of these anthologies because there's just too many people, but I listed the big names. Claire Rains as Lisa, Emilio Estevez as J.J. Cooney, Richard Mauser as Stephen Houston, Lance Henriksen as McLeod, and Veronica Cartwright as Claire Houston. So yeah, that's to set up the premise and the cast for the 1983 anthology movie Nightmares. I actually like this movie as a 1980s horror movie more than I like it, or I should say, I like this movie as a 1980s movie more than I like it as a horror anthology film, if that makes sense. I'm sure it will as I get more into my review here, but um, yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. As far as pros go, I think all four stories are really unique and have interesting premises. They're not just the vampire, the werewolf, the slasher. You know what I mean? How they sometimes these anthologies get kind of lazy with the writing. Oh, let's just do one about this. These are actually very unique, other than the first one, which is like I said, it's kind of been done before. The urban legend of having an escaped killer from like a oh, what the hell was it? A mental hospital, um, a mental institution, I should say. That one's been done before, but the other three are very unique and very interesting. So I give the movie credit for that. There isn't a dud in the bunch here, and the first story, the Terror in Topanga, I really like the ending twist in that one. How they kind of, it's kind of a short. You think you know how it's going to go at the end. But they kind of do it up in a kind of an interesting twist that I thought was pretty cool at the end. I don't want to give too much away, but it's basically the scene that takes place at a gas station where there's an attendant there at the gas pump with this gal who drives her car there because she's almost out of gas, and of course you have the escaped mental patient that's running around the area. So that always makes for some fun tension there, and just the way they did that though was very clever, and I enjoyed that. The end of the second story, the Bishop of Battle, I thought was very interesting. What level 13 actually is in the video game, and how it sort of goes next level. I'll just leave it at that. But I like that one. The Bishop of Battle doesn't really have a twist ending, but it definitely has dual vibes, directed by Steven Spielberg from 1971, going on there for the benediction, and then the Night of the Rat. That short actually had me into it for about 85%. Still, until they finally showed the rat at the end and how they did that, and then anyway, the Night of the Rat probably had the best tension, some of the best atmosphere in it up until the end. We'll get into it with my cons, but yeah, I think all four stories kind of delivered in that regard. Movie has a really solid cast that I mentioned, especially for the time that it came out. The movie's well acted. All the shorts are well acted. You know, anytime you have Lance Henriksen, Veronica Cartwright, Emilio Estevez, a very young Emilio Estevez, and Christina Reyes, I think they all do a good job given the writing and what they have to work with here with these stories. Um, I really enjoyed the 80s nostalgia and the aesthetic that's going on that this movie has, especially in the second story. I think the second story about the battle, the Bishop of Battle, really solidifies this is a 1980s movie because not only do you have the arcade settings going on, you have the mall setting. You have the 1980s mall, which if you're somebody like me that was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, I just love that kind of stuff. Just like the mall in um, Dawn of the Dead, and a lot of other movies too during this time in the 80s. But that hooked me right away. And again, it's not really horror related as far as an anthology goes, but I'm just talking about 80s movies in general, just to be able to have that aesthetic there. I really enjoyed the 80s nostalgia in this movie. That might have been more personal for me because, like I said, I was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s. So I could just appreciate a lot of what this movie has from that standpoint. I also really like the settings in this movie that the stories take place in. The first movie is very rural. It takes place in a very rural area, kind of out woodsy, outdoorsy kind of thing. This gas station that this lady goes to is very away from the beaten path, so that's a great setting. Of course, the malls and the arcades in the second story, the desert in the third story is great, and then the suburban house and the suburban area in the fourth story. For the 1980s suburbia, I guess if you want to say, was also very enjoyable. So I really did enjoy the settings that these four stories take place in. But yeah, overall, guys, these four stories I thought were solid. None of them really are like all timers, but none of them are bad either. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it on a level different than horror anthology. I enjoyed it on a 1980s movie level. So as far as cons go, none of these stories really are standouts. They're all fine, but nothing memorable. If there was one story that stands out, it would definitely be the Bishop of Battle, the second story with Emilio Estevez having to do with the video game and trying to get to a place nobody else has gone before. Um, if somebody said what segment stands out to you from the 1983 anthology Nightmares, that's the one that would come to mind for me, and I think for most people. Even though it's not really scary. Um, the lack of wraparound story or any sort of connective tissues, any connect between the stories is really of a letdown for me. And again, that might be more of a personal thing. It's the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of the ABCs of Death, or some other anthology movies like that because I like the wraparound. That's important to me in my anthology movies. Just having that connective tissue and getting the stories to connect in some way is one of the biggest things I enjoy about anthologies. This is just this is just four stories being introduced one after another. Chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, chapter four, with the titles that I gave away in when I was talking about the premises. And it makes sense why it's like that, because this wasn't a horror anthology movie that was made for a theatrical release. As I said earlier, it's the reason I brought it up that this was the pilot for a proposed television series to be broadcast on network television in 1983-84. Well, right off the bat, when you hear that, you know two things. You know it's not going to be very violent or very gory. And the second thing is, it's it's an anthological television show basically that ended up becoming a movie. So you're not going to have that wraparound story in that tissue because they were going to air it like probably a half hour episode, a half hour time block every week if it gotten picked up. And so you're not going to have, there's no crypt keeper, there's nobody to introduce you to the stories. It was just going to be, um, it was just going to, after the opening credits, which I actually forgot to mention, I'll get back to those with my pros because I really enjoyed. Well, I'll just get back to it now. The opening credits in this movie are great. I think it would have been a great opening credit segment for this if this had been a TV series. That's one of the pros that I forgot to mention. I really liked the visuals and the sound and the music of the opening credits here. Um, but then it just goes into chapter one, Terror and Topanga. So you're not getting introduced to the stories in terms of a wraparound. So that was a bummer for me. That's something that kind of knocks it down a peg. Again, that might just be a me thing. I'm sure it is. Some of the effects are really bad and outdated in this movie, especially the end of the fourth segment and final segment as they decide to show this over enlarged rat in front of a green screen and do a visual or do an optical effect as opposed to like a practical effect. I really would have preferred that they had like a animatronic rat or something. I'm sure it would have looked ridiculous too, but I can't believe it would have been. I would have enjoyed that more than, even if it looked ridiculous, than this enlarged rat, which was clearly they just threw a rat in front of a green screen and then enlarged it and then basically put it onto the regular screen that they were shooting where the family was. It looks terrible, man. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It absolutely ruined that segment for me in a lot of ways. Um, Other effects, like in the video game segment, the Bishop of Battle also don't really hold up that well. But that one I'm a little bit more forgiving on because they're using a lot of 3D effects during the early to mid 80s, and that's just kind of what you're going to get. I did like in that segment that um, he basically starts this video game, which is kind of a shooting game. It continues to be a shooting game outside of the video game console. I really enjoyed that whole concept and everything. Um, but yeah, the effects aren't great. And it makes sense. This is a very low budget, not even a theatrically released movie. A very low budget made for TV anthology movie, which is what it originally was. So you're not going to get Rick Baker effects here. You're not going to get Tom Savini coming in kind of effects because they didn't have a budget for that because this wasn't a theatrical movie. It was a made for TV anthology movie. So you kind of have to take that into account when you're watching it and rating it and those type of things. And that's what I'm going to do here when I give you my rating. But obviously, there's very little blood or gore in this movie. There's no nudity, as you would expect, because this was going to air on NBC in 1984. So that's not really a surprise. None of the whole movie, nothing's really scary. There's nothing really horrifying going on here. There are moments of tension and suspense, particularly in the first story, Terror in Topanga, and the last story, Night of the Rat, before they show the rat. The other two really don't have much horror or even tension in them, so I'm just throwing that out there. Doesn't mean they're bad, but from a horror anthology standpoint, I want to make that point though. Um, but yeah, overall, just kind of lackluster in terms of a horror anthology. I felt like. And again, lack of the budget really hurts this one. I think this could have been a top '80s anthology movie. Frankly, if it was a theatrical released one based on the stories and the ideas that they had here, had they had the money to execute them, especially from an effects standpoint, the Rat, the video games, even the Benediction one, where they have this black truck that comes out of the ground. It's kind of like Duel that's coming after this guy. If they could have if they could have done something more with the truck, or even eventually showed the devil, that Satan, which we're supposedly supposed to assume that this is. I think that would have been more helpful. But again, they didn't have the money to do that in any kind of meaningful way, and I get that. So I think the biggest downfall of this movie was just how it was perceived to come, the medium that it was trying to come to, and the lack of budget because of that. I think is its biggest downfall. But I can't say that I don't enjoy it. So I'm going to give Nightmares from 1983 overall a 6.5 out of 10. I went back and forth between a 7.5 and a 6. At the end of the day, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt because this was going to be an NBC, and again, network TV today, even today, and there's not much network TV, especially for movies. It isn't what it was in 1984, even what it could be today. I mean, 10 or 12 years ago, when you had shows like NYPD Blue, they could say shit on TV. They could show some naked ass. In 1983, 84, they really couldn't do much with made for TV movies. It had to be more of the idea of it. It had to be the suspense and the buildup of things. They weren't going to show. They couldn't show gore. They couldn't swear. They couldn't show any nudity. So I have to take that into account as well, as somebody that, well, I was very young. I grew up in that time, and I remember those movies of the week and stuff. So that's the reason why I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt a little bit. 6.5 out of 10 for Nightmares. As far as my ranking of the segments, I would say the Bishop of Battle would be my favorite. Um, Probably. mm, it's kind of tough because all four of these, none of them really separate themselves all that much from each other. The Bishop of Battle, 1. Knight of the Wrath, I'll say, is 2. Terror and Topanga is 3. And the Benediction is 4. But even the Benediction, I think, is very well done. And Lance Henriksen does a great job in that one. Um, so, yeah, that's my ranking of the four stories. But like I said, overall, 6.5 out of 10 for Nightmares from 1983, the horror anthology directed by Joseph Sargent. So go ahead and comment down below any thoughts you guys have on this movie. If you've seen it, any questions you have down in the comments below. Please like this video, hit the notification bell, and please subscribe to my channel if you can and if you want to. It would really help me out on my channel for going forward. Great content coming your way. So with that being said, I hope you're enjoying this anthology review series. I hope you enjoyed this individual review. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay scared. Bye.